My name is Eric Teskey. I'm the Alcohol and Other Drug Education and Prevention Coordinator at IUPUI in the Office of Health and Wellness Promotion in the Division of Student Affairs. This presentation is called Beyond Be Responsible, Personal Risk Management for Alcohol. It's a sort of Alcohol 101 presentation. It's a basic presentation that you would see in a first-year seminar class or often requested by student organizations or residence halls. So let's take a look. Throughout the presentation, I'll refer to the numbers of drinks, or how many drinks, or count the number of drinks. We want to make sure that we're all talking about the same units here because alcohol comes in different size-shaped containers and different concentrations. So when I say one drink, I'm talking about one standard drink. These are all considered one standard drink. 12 ounces of beer at 5% alcohol by volume, 4 ounces of red wine at about 15%. White wine will be a little bit less concentrated at about 11 or 12%. There's a lot of variation with wine. And then the only one we know for sure is the 80 proof liquor. That's the one that has the alcohol by volume right there in the name. It's actually double the percentage. So it's not 80% alcohol, it's 80 proof. Just like you'd see something called 151. It's not 151%, it's 151 proof. And so for that, one serving is 1.5 ounces or 1 shot glass worth of alcohol. All right, first up, true or false? Alcohol is a central nervous system depressant, which means it makes you sad. What do you think? The answer? This is false. So it is a central nervous system depressant. That doesn't mean it makes you sad. It actually slows down brain activity. It doesn't give you one emotion or another. It can magnify your emotions by reducing your inhibition, so basically making whatever emotion you are feeling more visible to the outside, but it's not going to assign you a specific emotion to feel. It is going to slow down your nervous system, your brain activity. This accounts for a lot of the side effects of alcohol, things like reduced reaction time, blurred vision, tunnel vision, things like that are all caused by its effect on the nervous system. All right, true or false? The only thing that will sober you up is time, and there is no way to speed up this process. What do you think? All right, you might have heard this one before, and this is true. BAC drops at a knowable rate, at about 0.015 per hour. Now, if we know that BAC is dropping at this pretty consistent rate, we can look at a timeline. Let's say that someone stopped drinking at 2 a.m. and their BAC was 0.20. Since we know BAC is dropping at a pretty consistent rate, we can look at a timeline. At 3 a.m. we'd be at 0.185, 4 a.m. 0.17, and so on. It wouldn't be until 10 a.m. the next morning that the person was sober enough to drive, or actually they would still be driving drunk at 10 a.m. at 0.08, the legal cutoff to drive if you're 21. So if someone had a class at 9 a.m., they would be drunk driving to class. And if you've ever heard someone wake up and say they felt like they were still drunk, believe them, because they might have been. And it wouldn't be until 4 p.m. the next day that, in this case, the person would be stone cold sober at 0.000. A lot can happen in this time. Picture waking up and going to class, going to work, grabbing a workout, all with at least a little bit of alcohol still in your system. Do you think you'd be performing at your best? Let's try this. True or false? Alcohol affects everybody in the same way as long as they're the same size. What do you think? Right, this one is false. Alcohol is going to affect everybody in different ways, even if they're the same size. There are a lot of ways that alcohol can affect people. Look at all these factors that affect intoxication, not just blood alcohol content, but the level of impairment based on other physiological, emotional factors. Level of hydration, body composition, hormone levels, amount of sleep, the list goes on. Let's look at the metabolism of ethanol. Ethanol is the type of alcohol that's in alcoholic beverages. You can see ethanol on the left as it's broken down, goes through two different phases, alcohol dehydrogenase is the enzyme that turns ethanol into acetaldehyde. Now, acetaldehyde is actually very toxic in your system and can cause damage to organs. So it has to be broken down yet again before it's turned into harmless acetate. There are some people that make less alcohol dehydrogenase. If you make less of the thing that's breaking down the ethanol, what's going to happen if that person continues to drink? Less alcohol dehydrogenase, and the level of ethanol goes up. This causes BAC to rise quickly and to stay high longer in people with less alcohol dehydrogenase. Now, there are some populations that naturally make less. Women tend to make less alcohol dehydrogenase than men, and it is hereditary, so it can be passed down to families in different populations such as Alaskan Natives, Pacific Islanders, Native Americans tend to have less alcohol dehydrogenase because it's passed down through their family bloodlines. Let's talk about the effect of body size and composition on blood alcohol concentration. So use your imagination and picture these three rectangles as three different people. I said use your imagination. Now the blue rectangle is the amount of lean body mass, the amount of tissues in the body that water can be dispersed into. Now alcohol can follow the water into these tissues. Alcohol penetrates every tissue of the body except bone and fat. So what will happen if we add some fat, some adipose tissue, to this rectangle on the left? You see that we've increased the size of the shape, but we haven't really changed the amount of blue area, the lean body mass where the alcohol can disperse into. Imagine pouring a vial of red food coloring into a glass of water. It would be very concentrated because it doesn't have that much space to spread out. Now imagine pouring that same amount of red food coloring into a swimming pool. It will be much more diluted because the food coloring has more space to spread out. The same is true with alcohol and lean body mass. Now if we increase the lean body mass, let's say the rectangle on the right has been pumping some iron, now we see more blue space, more area where the alcohol can spread out. So the same amount of alcohol now has more room to disperse and the concentration will be lower. We've looked at a variety of factors that affect the level of intoxication and blood alcohol concentration, and the conclusion here is that the decision to drink really should be a personal choice because everybody's body is different, everybody's body chemistry is slightly different, and everybody's family history is different. So everyone has genetic differences and physical differences. That means the alcohol is going to affect them in unique ways different from everyone else around them. All right, so we know the decision to drink is a personal choice. Let's look at some reasons people give for why they drink. These are survey results from 3,000 IUPUI students from a random sample in spring 2013. It didn't include students who did not drink at all, and it's sort of set up like Family Feud, where the number one answer is the most reported answer. It doesn't exactly work like Family Feud because the percentages don't add up to 100% exactly. It's sort of a check all that applies. So let's see the reasons that students gave. Number 8 was to get to sleep. 10% said they used alcohol to help them sleep. Number 7, to get away from problems. Number 6, because they're bored. Number 5, out of anger or frustration, or to deal with anger or frustration. Number 4, to feel good. Number 3, because it tastes good. Number 2, helps me relax. And the number 1 answer, it's a social activity. And this is pretty common. This is what we usually see rising to the top. There's definitely a social component to it, and people use it to help them relax. There are some good and some bad things about drinking. People definitely use it in different ways and can lead to positive and negative outcomes. So like we saw in the previous slide, people are using it as a way to relax, to help them socialize, or because they enjoy the taste, and those can be considered pretty good outcomes. There's also some bad. There's ways that people are using it that are maybe not so healthy, and it can lead to some pretty severe negative consequences. So let's remind ourselves of some of the good. All right, things that we recognize. Social activity helps me relax. Not so surprising there. And then some of the bad things. These are items that students usually give in presentations when we ask to name some of the bad or consequences from alcohol use. It can be anything from hangovers to causing fights, health consequences. It can get expensive, can cause people to miss classes. There's really a range of negative, everything from sending a text to your mom that you wish you didn't, all the way to serious injury or even death. So there's a big range. What we want to focus on is what's the risk versus benefit? How do we get all of the good and none of the bad? Is that even possible? If not, how do we get at least most of the good and reduce as much bad as possible? What would that look like? How could someone drink in a way to maximize the good and reduce the bad? They could be responsible, be safe, know when to stop. Do you notice anything about these phrases? These phrases frustrate me so much. This is the kind of stuff you see in alcohol commercials, or things your parents tell you, or your professors tell you. It's well-wishing. It doesn't really mean anything. Know your limits, be smart. That doesn't really provide any information. That would be like saying, do well on your exam. Well, thanks. That doesn't actually help me on my exam. How about some study tips or some test taking strategies? Something usable rather than just well-wishing. That's what I want to focus on next. Some real usable strategies and not just hoping for the best or wishing you well, hoping that nothing bad happens. If you want to get specific, this is very specific. I spent the whole first half of the presentation telling you about how everyone is a unique snowflake and everyone's drinking differently because their body is different. Well, the NIH is trying to be helpful by oversimplifying it. So we'll take this into consideration as we look at these low-risk drinking guidelines. They come from a survey of 43,000 US adults, and people who followed these strategies, only 2% went on to develop consequences of alcoholism or alcohol abuse. So pretty low risk, but there's still a risk there. The way it works is you have to follow both the top and the bottom rules. So let's take a look at this. Men should have no more than 4 drinks on any single day and no more than 14 in a week. Now, that doesn't mean have 4 drinks every single day. It doesn't mean save them all up and have 14 all at once on a Saturday. You have to follow both the top and the bottom to fall into this low-risk drinking guidelines. For women, it's fewer. It's no more than 3 drinks on any single day and no more than 7 in a week. Do you remember why women should have fewer drinks than men to be considered low risk? That's right. It's because women naturally make less alcohol dehydrogenase, so their BAC will rise faster, and as the BAC goes up, so does the risk level. If you wanted to be even lower risk, you'd follow the 0-1-2-4 rule. This puts you at low risk of all consequences, not just the consequences of developing alcoholism or alcohol abuse. This is all possible outcomes. It's been studied in things like divorce rates and joblessness and future salary. So a lot of different consequences are considered here, and this puts you at low risk of all of them. Here's how it works. There are people that should have 0 drinks to be considered low risk. That's people who are under the legal drinking age, pregnant, or on medication where they should not be drinking. Women can have 1 drink per day and still be considered low risk. No more than 1 drink per day for women. The 2, you guessed it, is for men. Men can have no more than 2 drinks per day and still be considered low risk. Now, is that 2 drinks every single day? That's the 4th rule. No more than 4 days per week. So whether it's 1 or 2 drinks, no more than 4 days a week to be considered a low-risk drinker. This puts you at low risk of all negative outcomes, including health consequences, legal trouble, or I guess anything. All right, this is one of my favorites. This is called the biphasic effect. On the left-hand side, you see a scale ranging from the effect of alcohol acting as a stimulating buzz all the way down to its sedative effects. And across the Horizontal axis, you see the blood alcohol content. Now, a lot of times when people start drinking, they are under the impression of a urban myth that the more alcohol, the better. If I have a little bit of fun when I have a little bit of alcohol, I'll have even more fun when I have a lot of alcohol. I'm sorry, it just doesn't work that way. But it is interesting that alcohol can sort of act like a stimulant, even though we know it's a central nervous system depressant. Here's what the curve actually looks like. In small quantities, alcohol does produce a sort of stimulating buzz. And then eventually, as the BAC rises, the sedative effects take over. It is, after all, a central nervous system depressant. But there's a point, right around 0.055, the point of diminishing returns. That's the peak of the crest. That's the top of the wave. And so if someone was drinking because they wanted that feeling of a stimulating buzz, a euphoric sensation, that's probably where they would want to stay. Now, what would the best strategy be to maximize the amount of time someone would spend at a BAC of 0.055? This just happens to look like low-risk drinking. It means spacing your drinks out over time, drinking a little bit and then waiting to see how you feel, drinking a little bit more and then stopping, alternating non-alcoholic drinks with alcoholic drinks, and so on. So these are all strategies that people can use to really maximize that buzz if that's what they're going for, but it also keeps them below the legal limit to drive and in a more reasonable range in terms of their BAC level and their overall risk. All right, I mentioned some strategies that people would use to stay at a certain BAC, to sort of hover at that 0.055. That's a way to drink in a low risk way. Let's look at some other common strategies that students say that they do most of the time or always. Number 8 would be tell friends it's okay to cut you off. This is sort of like giving your friends permission ahead of time so that they don't have to wonder whether or not you're going to be annoyed or angry that they cut you off. They'll know that they have your permission and that it's okay. Number 7, avoid drinking games, or I guess any situation that you'd be required or told to drink and not just drinking at your own comfortable pace. Number 6, set drink limit ahead of time. This is when you decide how many drinks you're going to have when you're sober and then try to stick to that later on. Number 5 would be to stick to one kind of drink. 50% of people said that they do this most of the time or always when they're drinking. Number 4 is count your drinks. This is a great way to keep track and try to guess what your BAC would be, to keep track of how many you've had over how long a period of time, and just monitor to make sure that your number of drinks isn't going up too quickly. All right, number 3, eat something. Having something in your stomach is a great way to reduce your risk, and we'll go into more detail in the next slide. Number 2, use a designated driver. Only 84% here. I wish that number was a little bit higher. At least it made the top 2. Using a designated driver is definitely a way to reduce risk of some pretty serious consequences. And the number 1 answer, survey says, stick together. Now, you might not think this is an alcohol risk reduction strategy. It's just staying with your friends and hanging out. It's actually a great way to make sure that you have each other's backs, to watch out for one another, and make sure everyone's being safe. You can make sure someone gets home safely. And think about it, if someone shows up at a party alone, no one at the party has any idea if the person just did 5 shots or if they've had any alcohol at all. So it makes it tough to guess unless you're with someone for the course of the whole night. It makes it really difficult to kind of keep track about people around you and how much they're consuming. All right, this is what I call the stomach diagram. Let's look at this. Here's your stomach. Now let's fill it with some alcohol. All right, now what are we going to eat? Let's try a cheesy gordita crunch. That's my favorite. Let's say you've got this alcohol in your stomach along with a cheesy gordita crunch. What is the effect and how is it helping you out? Well, it's going to slow the absorption of the alcohol in 3 different ways. First, it's going to actually soak up some of the alcohol. Now, this is pretty minimal, but it is technically happening. Any food that's sort of like a sponge will absorb some of the alcohol temporarily. Now, that alcohol will get absorbed later on, but like I said, it's just slowing down how long it takes for the alcohol to get absorbed. Number two is it's blocking contact with the stomach lining. So if it's coming in contact with the stomach lining, that's a point where now the alcohol cannot be absorbed. And so with absorption, it's all about surface area. The more surface area the alcohol has with the lining of your stomach, the faster it'll be absorbed. So it's technically blocking a little bit of that stomach lining. Probably the most significant way that it's going to help you out is it's slowing absorption by keeping the food in your stomach longer. Once the contents is sent along to the duodenum or the duodenum, I've heard it both ways, absorption is much faster. The surface area of your duodenum is about as big as a tennis court, and so the alcohol has a lot of space to get absorbed through that lining, get into your bloodstream. So that's pretty much it. Is having food in your stomach going to reduce your BAC? Well, it's going to make the alcohol in your stomach stay there longer. It will eventually make its way to your bloodstream. It's certainly not sucking alcohol out of your veins, right? But it's going to delay the alcohol that's currently in your stomach from getting there longer, so it can help your body keep up and really spread out the amount of time it takes for that to get absorbed. Let's try this question. What percent of male IUPUI students have 4 or fewer drinks when they go out? Now, this is a self-report survey from spring 2014. It is a random sample, and it's completely anonymous. We do 3 different assessments at IUPUI, and all the numbers end up about in the same area. So we think that's a pretty good test of validity to make sure that we're not just getting random answers from people, and we think we have a pretty good handle of what students are actually doing. Let's see. Did you get your guess yet? It's actually A, 68%. What percent of female IUPUI students have 4 or fewer drinks when they go out? This is from the same survey, obviously female students here. What percent do you think have 4 or fewer? It's actually 79%. For men and women combined, it's 75% of the student body having 4 or fewer drinks when they go out. You can see they're right there in that range. They're pretty much following the low-risk guidelines. Let's try this question. What percent of IUPUI students have had 0 drinks in the past 30 days? 0 drinks in the past month. Not even 1 drink in the past month. What percent do you think? All right, it's about a third. 32%. Did you find yourself underestimating the percent of students who drink in a low-risk way? Why is that? Let's explore this more using what I like to call the 100-people house party. Imagine a hypothetical house party with 100 attendees, where the number of drinks they have is exactly representative of a cross-section of the entire student body. How many drinks would each person have? Some people would be having 1 to 4 drinks. Quite a few, actually. Some people would be having 5 drinks. Some people would be having 6 drinks. And then there's the group playing beer pong, puking in the stairwell, knocking over the bird bath. They're having 7 or more. I think the highest was even 18 drinks in a single night. And they're represented by these dots over here. So I call this job security, right? There's definitely some high-risk drinking going on at IUPUI. There's a handful of students at this hypothetical party, but it's definitely not the majority. Most people at this party are having 1 to 4 drinks, and so far the people that had 0 drinks aren't even at the party. Let's take a look when we add those. If you add in the students that didn't even drink that night, 1/3 of IUPUI students, you see that the people having 7 or more really don't speak for everybody. They really don't represent what a typical student is doing. But if you were going to ask somebody, how was the party last night? Who do you think they would tell a story about? Yeah, they're going to talk about the more extreme behavior, the stuff that makes headlines. It shows up on your news feed, and there's a 10-minute Snapchat story about it. It seems more interesting, intriguing, extreme. It's the kind of stuff that would make the news. It's the same reason my mom freaks out that I work in downtown. She watches the evening news too much. And what kind of stuff comes up there? It's the hand-picked stuff that's the most interesting, most extreme things. If you formed your opinion about what daily life was like in Indianapolis based on the evening news headlines, you'd be scared to go outside. So that same thing is happening with our perceptions about high-risk drinking. If we only hear from the people who are doing the more extreme behavior, and there's not really that many stories about the people that had 0 or 1 drink that night. No one's bragging on social media, had 1 drink and folded laundry, now I'm going to watch Netflix. So if you don't hear about it, you don't remember it. And that can, I think, contribute a lot to skewing our perception about what we consider typical or normal. Okay, here we have information from Alcohol EDU. This is the online course that incoming students take, and we can see that the first 3 weeks of school here, there's definitely some peaks and valleys. This is what we consider sort of typical college binge drinking, where the number goes way up on weekends and goes back down during the week. Now, even though it's peaking on Fridays and Saturdays, notice the average number of drinks. It's only going up to about 2 drinks on average, and the national average is about 3 drinks. So although it does spike on weekends and we see this pattern, the number doesn't shoot up to 7 to 10 drinks on average. The average is still fairly low. Here's some more information from Alcohol EDU. These are some negative consequences that are experienced by students at IUPUI, and these are self-report numbers. You can see that I'm pretty pleased. IUPUI is below the national average in things like having a hangover, blacking out, missing class. But there's 2 areas on here that we're actually exceeding the national average. Can you see which ones they are? They're right down here. And what do these have in common? They both have to do with vehicles, either riding with someone after they've been drinking or driving after having a few drinks. So what do you think it is about Indianapolis or IUPUI's campus that would make us be beating the national average when it comes to risky behavior with alcohol and vehicles? Think about that. I'll have you reflect on that in a discussion question, so keep that in mind as we move forward here. Okay, here's a snapshot of just some other risk behaviors for IUPUI students. You see, compared to the national average, IUPUI is just a different kind of campus. It just doesn't seem to be what we do here as much. Doing shots, pre-gaming, chugging, you see it's all easily under about 1/3 of the students engaging in these behaviors. It's just not quite as typical here at IUPUI. Okay, let's talk about the signs of alcohol poisoning. If you've ever taken a first aid class or a lifeguard training class, you probably learned about the symptoms of shock. Alcohol poisoning is pretty similar in a lot of ways. If the person has cold, clammy, bluish skin, any kind of slow or irregular breathing, irregular heart rate, if the person's vomiting while they're passed out or vomiting excessively, and then if the person cannot be awakened. Those are definitely signs that something serious is going on, and it's considered an alcohol emergency at that point. So definitely that's an appropriate time to call 911. If left untreated, alcohol poisoning can be deadly. Remember, alcohol is a central nervous system depressant, so it can slow your heart rate and breathing to the point where your body doesn't get enough oxygen, and it can kill you that way. What's more likely is if the person is drunk enough to vomit, but too drunk to be able to roll over or clear the vomit from their mouth. If they're unresponsive, the person can actually choke on their own vomit, and it can be deadly that way. Even if someone doesn't die from alcohol poisoning, it can lead to brain damage, seizures, hypothermia. So there's a lot of different things that can happen, and we definitely want to intervene to prevent these things from occurring. What you can do to help is to initiate the emergency action response as soon as possible. Call 911, get an RA, tell someone to call the police, get that emergency response initiated as soon as possible. And don't leave the person alone. You definitely want to stay with them, make sure that they don't vomit and choke on it, make sure that their breathing is continuing. Don't put them to bed to sleep it off, and if they pass out, make sure that they're on their side so the vomit can clear. Unfortunately, there's no simple thing that you can do to just leave them and know for sure that they are going to be fine. If you put them to sleep on their stomach, they could suffocate in a pillow. If you put them to sleep on their back, they could choke on vomit. And if you put them to sleep on their side, who's to say that they're not going to toss and turn and roll over? So unless you're going to be with them the entire night, monitoring their pulse and breathing, it's really best to get a professional to do a medical evaluation so that you're not playing doctor and trying to guess to determine if someone is okay or not. Leave that to the professionals and let them make the call. Okay, Indiana actually has a very progressive medical amnesty law called the Indiana Lifeline Law. It was expanded in 2014 and provides legal immunity. The word immunity is right there in the law. Now, that's not very often that you see that. It provides immunity from underage drinking and public intoxication laws for anyone who calls the police in response to a crime, reporting being the victim of a sexual offense or other health emergency. This is for individuals and groups, so it's not a race to the phone to see who's immune. Anyone who's on the scene helping can receive that immunity. And the way it's worded is if you're reporting what you believe to be a crime, then you can still get that immunity. So it doesn't have to actually even be a crime. If you see something that doesn't look right, that looks like an emergency is happening, and that's the reason the police find out about your underage drinking or public intoxication, then you have immunity and you cannot be charged with those. Like I said, it only covers certain laws, so public intoxication and the minor possession, consumption, and transport laws. And if the person reveals themselves to law enforcement, like again, if that's the reason they find out is because you made the call, not because you were going to call or you meant to call later on, it's if you actually were the one to call or revealed yourself to law enforcement, and that's the reason they found out. It's really designed to encourage bystanders to make the call, to remove that hesitation and those barriers. We don't want people standing around for half an hour debating whether or not they should make the call. We want them to make that call right away. You receive immunity if you are the one who calls or if you act alongside the person who calls. So if you are with someone and you're also on the scene helping, you will also receive immunity. But if you're in the backyard playing beer pong, I'm sorry, you're not acting alongside the person who called. You have to provide your full name and stay on the scene, cooperate with authorities, basic stuff like that. Okay, the Lifeline Law was expanded in 2014 to create a deferment condition for the victim. So maybe you're thinking, well, I'm not worried about getting in trouble myself, but what about the person who's passed out? I don't want them to get in trouble. There's now a deferment condition where they can pay a fine to the court, take an alcohol education class, and they can get that sealed from their record, where there's actually no conviction on their record. So they don't have to report anything to future employers. It's not going to show up in a background check, anything like that. It establishes a mitigating circumstance for drug possession. So Indiana didn't make a law that says we're going to ignore drug laws. Instead, they make a mitigating circumstance, which means the judge has to officially take it into consideration upon sentencing. So 9 times out of 10, that's going to mean a reduced sentence for drug possession. It's just not written crystal clear guaranteed in the law, but unless there's nothing else like violence that accompanied it, if it's just the drug possession, it's probably going to be a reduced sentence because they want to encourage people to do the right thing and make the call. They want to reward that behavior. They don't want to turn around and say, "Thanks for calling to save your friend's life. Now you're busted." So they really try to make it a little bit easier on the person doing the right thing. It also allows emergency responders to administer an overdose intervention drug immediately. So this is called naloxone, and it's like an EpiPen that goes in the thigh. So if a person is overdosing on opiate drugs, it stops the overdose from happening. I hear it's actually quite shocking. In emergency rooms, they'll administer it, and the person will be foaming at the mouth 1 minute, and then 2 minutes later, up and walking and talking. It really does stop the overdose in its tracks. And now emergency responders can administer that right away. If someone was under 18 before, they used to have to call the parents or get a prescription for it, and now they can just give it, no questions asked, because really it saves the person's life on the spot. Well, that's all we have. This has been the Alcohol Personal Choices presentation as part of the Health and Wellness Peer Education program. Continue the discussion online and on Canvas and continue on to the next week's course. Thanks a lot.